Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is the Voices of Healing podcast. I'm your host, Tina Clark. I'm a shamanic Reiki healer based in the Charleston, South Carolina area, and I interview wonderful people around the world. And today's guest is Murphy Monroe, and he's in the Chicago area. We were just talking about that. And he is a autistic speaker and writer. And we're gonna dive into that and some of the ways to help neurodivergent people and what that is too. I'd like to get into. But before we do, Murphy, can you tell us more about yourself and your background?
Sure. Thanks, Tina. It's fun to be here. So I am a father of two, 15 and 22. I'm a husband, a very super lucky husband. I My day job is I am the executive director of a circus school and theater company in Chicago called the Actors Gymnasium, one of the largest circus schools around, and an incredibly fun and joyous place to be. Um, I also, my other occupation is that I own a float spa or a sensory deprivation spa, where I am deeply, deeply interested in the effects of sensory deprivation or the effects of nothing on our bodies and minds and the connection thereof. Um, and I think the other thing to know about me is I am openly autistic and do my best to live a life that honors that and that puts it first and that tries to create space um, for it in my life. And so as a result of that, I do a lot of speaking and consulting work, and I'm incredibly proud that in my hometown here in Evanston, Illinois, I lead a commission that oversees the city's work on the American with Disabilities Act and being an overall accessible city. And so that's a whole bunch of things, but that's me in a nutshell. And I'm looking forward to talking about autism and sensory deprivation and other things that I think will be meaningful to your audience.
Yeah, so I've done over 60 interviews so far for the podcast, and you're my first autistic guest. So I'm happy about that. And can you talk more about what neurodivergent means? Because I hear that word a lot, and what does that mean?
Yeah. So um, neurodivergence is simply a way of creating a sort of a large category of people who have a literal wiring of their brains that is different than what we would think of as a typical um, brain wiring. And so this manifests itself in a number of different things that we put labels on, like ADHD, um, or autism or Tourette's, a whole list of neurological conditions that ultimately are the result of a different type of brain wiring. And then we put them all into a bucket that we just call neurodivergent. And these are people whose, neurology is significantly different, so different that it puts them inside of a framework where they are living a significantly different kind of experience in their consciousness, in their bodies, in their lived experience, and their communication styles. And so we created this sort of category of neurodivergent that
Hmm.
all those folks live in. Um, we have these quadrants of our brain that speak to each other, and they are all wired together in all sorts of super complicated ways. And for people who are neurodivergent, that wiring looks different, not necessarily wrong, just different. And that means that in some cases, the wiring between quadrants of the brain is like a superhighway. The information moves much more fast, much more keen, with much more bandwidth than it would for a normal, atypical brain. Or on the other side of that spectrum, there's places where the wiring between quadrants of the brain is just sludge and moves incredibly slowly or perhaps not at all. And these either super fast or super slow connections are different for different people, and for any individual person happen differently for them. And part of why this is why when we talk about autism, we call it an autism spectrum, um, because each and every person has a different variation of their wiring, and maybe particularly keen and fast in some areas, and maybe really slowed down, dulled, or stopped entirely in other areas.
Yeah. And you say that autism is a different style of consciousness. What do you mean by that?
Hmm. Well, consciousness might be too big of a word, but it is such a different wiring that the fundamental experience of an autistic person is just different from the foundation. Um, and no doubt that has an effect on our consciousness or is directly tied to our consciousness. And by a different experience, what I mean is since I've been aware or had consciousness, it's just been keenly obvious to me, even at the youngest of ages, that I was different than everybody else around me. And I don't mean different by look necessarily, but that the experience I was having, the way that I was getting information, the way that I was processing information, both visual information and any other type of information, just had to be different than everybody else around me. It was really clear that they were all connecting and communicating and operating in ways that were really natural, and connected, and that I was just absolutely not a part of, didn't even really sort of have a way into. Um, and so there is everything goes through a filter. And so, all things are being filtered, and there is a um, different level or different kind of brain activity that's taking place. And I don't mean like savant brain activity necessarily. I just mean a lot of noise, a lot of information, a lot of input, really fast input that requires a lot of effort to weed through, to filter out, to figure out your way out of so that you can someone else can come in, and you can connect on the thing that is potential between um, the two of you. And so, um, as far as consciousness, my personal framework believes that consciousness is all around us, that consciousness is everywhere, and that consciousness includes everything that has been, everything that will be, and everything that's happening right now. Um, and so that consciousness comes into us, right? And we are receiving it into our bodies, into our brains. And so me experiencing things, or someone autistic experiencing things through a different framework, really ultimately means that that's our consciousness, that's impacting our consciousness. It's just fundamental to who we are, and how we operate.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And if you are a person like me who's highly sensitive and has some psychic and mediumship abilities, we're receiving information that a lot of people are not receiving
That's right.
or noticing.
Or don't
Um,
even know is potential, don't even know exists to potentially receive.
yeah.
Absolutely right. Yeah,
And
for
then
sure.
it's confusing or, you know, you wonder, you're getting this information and you don't know what it means. It's very common for me, for example, when I'm asleep or in that in between twilight
Yes,
time,
absolutely.
I see faces. My eyes are closed. I see faces. Sometimes I hear voices. I don't know where they're coming from. I don't know who this is, and it's like, what do I do with that information? Do I
Hmm.
do anything with that information?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's getting imprinted on you somehow when that's happening. And maybe it's information that uh, its time and purpose will become clear at some
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
I wonder. But I think, within it's a sensitive topic, but you've jumped right there, and so I'll bring it up, which is that um, within the autistic community, there are a whole spectrum of savant skills that people can have. Not that people always do have, that's a lousy stereotype. But it is real that there are a lot of savant gifts that exist within the autistic brain. We've seen examples of like really young kids who have like uh, piano skills and music skills that like have absolutely are, like um, genius, but they've never been trained. It just came out of nowhere to them, and now they can do it. And we've seen examples of this in all sorts of people. Um, and throughout history, within that set of autistic savant skills has definitely existed um, uh, extra perception abilities, has definitely existed and still does. And we hear more and more about this as people become more and more open to hearing it. Um, but has existed all sorts of, we don't have good words for these things. I'm going to use the word telepathy,
Hmm.
um, but I don't know that that's the right or the best word. But within that set of savant skills in the autism community has always been telepathy, or the ability, particularly amongst nonverbal autistic folks, and for the ability for them to communicate in a large variety of ways with either their parents, with their caretakers, teachers, or in many cases with each other. Um, and so I do wonder often that those kinds of skills of mediumship and intuition that you and I know many of your listeners have, if that isn't also some kind of wiring difference that doesn't perhaps also come from some alternative way that our brains have been wired in order to create space um, for those types of opportunities and for that type of um, additional sensing that is seems to be beyond the reach of most of humanity at this point in our evolution.
Yeah. Have you heard of the podcast? I think it's called Telepathy Tapes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm familiar
Yeah,
with
so
telepathy
that
tapes.
that
Yeah.
podcast has been kind of shaking everybody up because it's talking about how nonverbal autistic children are telepathic. So very interesting if you want to check that out.
Yeah.
But let's
And
get into float tanks.
mhm,
And I know that you're a big believer in them and you've spent 1,000 hours in
at
these
least.
tanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So what are these benefits that you're experiencing with the float tanks?
Yeah. Well, let me start just for your listener's sake of a quick just description of sensory deprivation and a float tank. Um, so a float tank is 10 inches of water. And that 10 inches of water has filled with a saturation of 40% magnesium sulfate or Epsom salt, which makes that water just purely buoyant, like the Dead Sea, so that any human of any size could just lie right on top of the surface of the water and be completely held and able to relax all body, all muscles, all joints, everything all at once into this weightlessness. But the power of the float tank is that we then take the water that's there and we heat it precisely to skin temperature, 94.5 degrees or so. Then we take the air above the water and we also heat that to the exact same temperature. So now your body is lying on top of this water. Your ears are below the surface of the water, so you can't hear anything. The water is body temperature. The air above the water is body temperature. And then we turn off the lights. And so it is completely pure dark. It is completely pure dark when we turn off the lights. And the reality is that the brain, when it can't see the water, and when the water, air, and body are the same temperature, the brain loses track of the water entirely, which means that one is just purely floating. Just floating, absolutely no sensory input on the body whatsoever, nothing to hear, nothing to see, nothing to feel, nothing to smell, just a pure sensory deprivation experience. And there's float centers all over the place. Folks can find them locally. People do this for generally 60 minutes or 90 minutes at a time. And it is a powerful, powerful therapy for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is just that the magnesium sulfate is just so incredibly good for us. It uptakes up into our bodies as we're floating in it, but also it's just pulling lactic acid right out of our muscles as we're lying there and doing wonders for inflammation, for muscle recovery. But the real thing, or the real power that happens in there is just this pure space. The body, the mind has the potential to just enter into a pure state, to get in that space you were talking earlier about, that liminal space. To be able to enter that becomes a lot easier and a lot more sustainable over a period of time when you are in such a state of complete sensory deprivation. And so the float tank is a holy space for a lot of people. A big part of their spiritual practice involves dedicated time inside the float tank. Um, for others, a whole variety of reasons. The float tank was originally invented as a way to experience alternative consciousness, as a way to get to a different state of the brain that might allow access to different brain states. For me, though, and for autism, it's been just an epiphany. And so one of the things of autism that exist on that spectrum we talked about earlier is interoception, right? And interoception is our ability to hear our own body. Our body tells us when we're hot or cold or sick or have to go to the bathroom. And this is something that I've always had a very, very poor at. Just no connection or very little connection between my brain and my body itself. And it was really inside the float tank in that pure state of sensory deprivation that I, over time, integrated my body and my mind. It was in the float tank at 40 years old that I heard my heartbeat for the first time and actually became aware of my own lungs, of my own diaphragm, of my own body, and how my body actually connected to my mind. I'd spent years in acting and voice training being taught how to breathe from my diaphragm, and the whole time I was just pretending it was an intellectual exercise. But in the float tank, all of a sudden my mind and body became integrated in a completely different way, really almost like holding me up in a way, and making me far more confident, far more centered, far more still, um, far more able to listen and be present Um, it's my favorite place to be. You know, it would likely hurt the feelings of my family to know, but um, being in the middle of nothing, doing absolutely nothing, thinking about nothing, is really my favorite state of being.
Yeah, it's a nice break to have, and I think everybody should have those breaks. And I think that's why so many of holistic healers recommend meditation
Mhm.
to give yourself a break from all the mind chatter and
Our left
the
brains are busy.
yeah, and the beauty of quieting that chatter is you connect to your intuition and you connect to your body like you do in those float tanks.
Mhm.
Now, I tried it once. I like to try things. Um, I did have the lights turned off, but I didn't like that. So there was an option to have like a low light, and I thought it was okay. Um, it was not something that I was like, oh my God, I have to do this every day. But I can see how if your mind is very busy and you have trouble trying to quiet that, well, what if someone is in the float tank and all they do is think, think, think? I
Well,
could see that
yeah,
happening too.
yeah. Well, so some people are in the float tank for that purpose. And so if you were to go to a lot of like tech headquarters, you know, headquarters of Google, you'll find float tanks. Um,
Mm,
and they're there for problem solving, to use that intense power of that space with zero distractions in order to actually think about one thing intensely and try to solve a problem or try to see something differently using the concentrated space. Now, there are many people who just come to try floating, and for whom the idea of being alone with their brain chatter for that long is just feels, or in many cases is impossible. Um, and so, to me, um, that's just an invitation. Um, to try to find balance and to try to find a way to calm that brain chatter. And so it doesn't have to be in a float tank, although I think a float tank, it's almost like training wheels um, for meditation, because it just
mhm.
forces everything out. It just sort of puts you in a space with no distractions.
Yeah.
Um, and, I tell people often who are unable to calm their mind or unable to find any sense of peace. I think for me, the thing to do in those moments is to see if you can't acknowledge what's happening, right? We just start with saying, oh my gosh, wow, I am thinking way more than I want to be right now. My left brain is really active. It's actually impressive how many thoughts I'm able to come up with all at once in this like way. It's really amazing what my left brain can do. And then doing your best to get in a position where you're observing those thoughts rather than just having those thoughts. Because the more we're able to understand that we can observe our thoughts, the more obvious it becomes that we can control our thoughts. Um, and so we don't have to be a victim to that chatter. We can come to listen to the chatter, then we can come to know the chatter, and then we can come to acknowledge the chatter. And then we can come to see that, hey, if I can see this chatter, if I can watch this chatter, if I can talk about this chatter, then I'm not this chatter. And so then all of a sudden we can come into a different relationship with it. Um, and this is often what I recommend to people who really want to be in that type of space, but their brain is taking over. And it's just good for us to remember that if we can observe it, then it isn't us.
Yes, that is true. And there's this concept in spiritual circles called the void. and are meditating in the void or going into the void. And basically, it's just this dark space where there's nothing there. And I'm going to get woo with you, Murphy. But
Please.
when I went to Egypt, I had the chance to go to the Great Pyramid and into the King's Chamber. And there's a sarcophagus, for lack of a better word. Well, let's call it a granite box with an
Yep.
opening on it at the end of the room. And we were chanting and singing in this room, me and my three friends, because we believe this is a sound chamber.
Hmm.
And we each took turns laying in the box, the
Oh.
granite box. And I remember we had our phones because all the lights were turned off.
Mm-mm.
So you can't see anything in there.
What an
And
experience.
yeah. And I remember glancing at my friend's phone and it said 222. It was in the middle of the night,
Mm-hmm.
2:22 a.m. And I went in there and my friends are singing and they're chanting and they're toning. And it was like I was in nothingness. I couldn't see anything. But it just felt like I went into the void.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. And was the void comforting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I could
Yep.
feel angelic energy around
Yep.
me.
Yep.
And that's the only beings I really felt around me, and that and just floating in space,
Mm-hmm.
for lack of better words,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yes. I mean that's the feeling I know. That's the dragon I'm chasing.
Mm,
Is being in that void, being in that place that just holds me and feels so safe. Um, and where there is no shame. Um, and where there is clearly a much the the potential to be connected to all that is to me becomes much more clear in that space.
mm-hmm.
I don't have the kind of intuition that you have, I'm certain. Um, but I have so many moments where it just becomes clear to me in the most fundamental way that um, um, everything is one.
Yeah,
And in that space, that void, um, uh, when I'm able to be there, that's in many ways that feeling of, of one love.
yeah. And I like it there. I had another healer tell me, and when you hang out with other healers and sensitives, they just give you information about yourself, right?
Totally.
And this one healer was like, you like to be in the void. That is the
Mm,
place where you enjoy being. And I thought, what is this place?
yeah.
But in my practices, like as an energy healer with theta healing, we go up to creator level, and there's nothing there but creator's voice.
Mm,
So I practice, you can practice this. And if you're not doing this, try the float tanks, try the meditation, try to be mindful. That's why when we take a shower, we get aha moments and answers to our problems.
hmm.
Because this is probably has to do with our brain just went into alpha or theta, and
Hmm.
that's where the answers are.
Hmm. That's right. It's just absolutely true. That's where our intuition lies.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you say that Reiki, um, you mentioned the Reiki in your notes for the show, and that Reiki is an energetic recalibration, similar to your experience in the float tanks. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that we have a fair amount of Reiki healers who float with us as part of their own wellness practices. And I think that there is a cleansing, like a spiritual cleansing that comes from being in that kind of space, the space that the float tank offers, where one can uh, participate in either personal rituals or can um, come to a place um, of healing, of spiritual healing in a way that has the potential to cleanse. You know, some people use psychedelics as a way to try to cleanse, or other sort of extreme things, darkness retreats. But I think that the flow tank invites that opportunity to be able to come back to a place of neutrality, to a place um, where then one can emerge and feel whole, feel cleansed. And I think that, at least for the um, Reiki practitioners that work with us, um, they speak of it being strengthening for them, of it being like a multiplier of energy, and a space that they feel like they get renewed in and then come out of with even more potential. Um, I don't want to speak for any of them, but it's just clear that this is the experience folks are having, and I think there is a real meaningful connection there.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, we just need to give our nervous systems a break. And we're not really taught how to do that. And our parents really didn't know how to do that unless you had special parents.
That's right.
My parents didn't know how to do that,
Right.
you
No,
know? So,
me neither.
right. So we have to learn and we have to find these different techniques and modalities to help us.
hmm
So I love that. Is there anything else you want to add about anything we talked about?
Well, I would just maybe add one thing to autism that I think is good for folks to know or think about. And that's just simply the idea that the number one activity or the number one occupation of autistic people is pretending not to be autistic.
Mhm.
And pretending not to be something that you are is a really ugly thing and is a really dangerous thing if one practices this over a lifetime. Um, and the reason autistic people make it their occupation to not appear autistic um, is because the kind of characteristics that autistic people have so often are not welcomed or don't easily fit in to our society. This includes maybe just physical mannerisms, vocal mannerisms, but it also might include things like, I don't know, questioning authority or um, stating facts or insisting on logic. And uh, us as more and more autism diagnoses take place, and as it becomes revealed that so many folks out there have a different kind of experience, the more aware we all become to it, the more space we all make for each other, and then the more voices are at the table. And some of the most important voices aren't at the table simply because we just don't have a society yet that makes room for it. Um, and I like that message, and I like to share it when I have the chance.
Yeah, and I love that. And I hope that we become a culture that becomes more open to those different voices and what they contribute to our society, to our culture.
Yeah.
Well, Murphy, how tell us where the float tanks are, because I know you're in the Chicago area, and then how people can contact you.
Thanks so much. The float spa that I owned is called True Rest Old Orchard. It's in Skokie, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. Anybody who wants to connect with me or learn more about my work can find me on my website, which is murphymonroe.com, MurphyMonroe. You can learn about the type of speaking and consulting work I do, or learn about the circus school, or just reach out and connect to me. I'm always interested in connecting with anyone whom I've touched, and very much appreciate the chance to do this.
Well, thank you, Murphy, for being on the show. I so appreciate you coming on. I know that it's probably challenging for you to do this kind of thing, but we need to get the word out, and that's why the podcast is here, to give you a voice. And you are a voice of healing.
Thank you so much, Tina. I really appreciate it.